Get him out of my house. Security already had a hand on Elias's arm. Marcus was staring at the locket like he'd seen a ghost. His face had gone pale, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the small silver shape in Elias's palm. Sir, $20 wasn't worth this. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. Where did you get this? It wasn't a question. It was a demand. If you've ever wondered what a stranger's kindness actually cost them, stay until the end of this one. Subscribe now, because what happens next will change how you see every person you walk past without looking at. 3 days earlier, Elias slept behind a laundromat on Ferrer Street, using his jacket as a pillow and his backpack as a wall against the wind. The dryer vent behind him kept that one patch of concrete warm until around midnight. Then it went cold like everything else. He'd learned to time his sleep around it. He hadn't eaten since the morning before. There was a woman 2 doorways down, older than him, thinner than him, who kept a shopping cart she never let out of arm's reach. She hadn't eaten in longer than he had. He split his last protein bar in half without saying anything about it. Just set her piece on top of the cart, where she'd see it when she woke. She caught him walking away and called out a thank you. He just nodded and kept moving. He didn't need her to make a thing. His medication ran out in 2 days. He'd already stretched the last dose further than the label allowed, skipping mornings to make the bottle last. Without it, his hands would start shaking by Thursday. Then his vision would blur at the edges by Friday. He knew the exact order because it had happened before the winter he lost apartment. He didn't talk about that winter much, not even to himself. It was easy to think of his life now as a single stretch of bad luck than to remember the specific week it all came apart. The diagnosis, then the calls from work about missed shifts, then the letter about the lease. 3 separate collapses that had felt, at the time, like they were happening to 3 different people. The rain started an hour after sunrise, the kind that didn't announce itself, just arrived. He was walking the length of Ferrer Street with his hood up when something caught the streetlight in the gutter, half buried under a grate. He crouched down, pulled it free, a small silver locket, tarnished almost black in a hinge, hanging on a chain that had snapped somewhere near the clasp. He almost pocketed it without a second look. Just another piece of scrap, maybe worth something, maybe worth nothing, the kind of thing you find twice a year on these streets and forget about by nightfall. He turned it over once at his fingers, felt the weight of it, lighter than he expected, and wiped the tarnish with his thumb out of habit more than curiosity, before slipping it into his jacket pocket and heading toward the pawn shop on 9th, the only one that opened before 8. The bell above the door rang thin and cheap. The broker barely looked up from his phone. "What ya got?" Elias set it on the counter. The broker picked it up without much interest, turned it once under the lamp, popped it open, glanced at whatever was inside for half a second, and shrugged. Old silver. Scratched to hell. Chains broken, hinges shot. He set it back down like it had already bored him. $20. Take it or leave it. Elias felt something shift in his chest. $20 was real. $20 was 2 more days of meals, or half of what he still needed for his medication refill, or the difference between a bad week and a slightly less bad week. He did the math the way he always did now, fast and automatic, breaking it into what it would actually buy. He reached for it, actually reached, fingers halfway to the counter, already picturing the pharmacy line tomorrow morning, already deciding which meal he'd skip to stretch it further. Then he stopped. There was something engraved inside the locket, worn almost smooth but still legible if you tilted it right under the lamp. An address. Not a name, not a date, not an initial, just an address, like whoever carried this wanted it findable, not remembered. "You want the 20 or not?" the broker said, already reaching for the register. Elias picked the locket back up instead. "Actually, can you tell me how to get to this address?" The broker squinted at him like he'd lost something more valuable than the sale. "That's clear on the other side of the city. Rich end. You got bus fare." Elias checked his pocket. He had exactly enough for 1 bus ticket, and nothing left after that. No dinner tonight. No buffer if the bus was late, and he missed a transfer. He'd be walking into tomorrow with an empty stomach and a countdown on his medication that was now 1 day shorter, because the $20 that could have covered part of it was still sitting in a stranger's locket 100 blocks from where he actually needed it. He looked at the address again, then at the door. "Yeah," he said, "I've got enough." The broker shook his head slowly, the way you'd watch someone step in front of traffic, and slid the locket back across the counter, without another word. The bus was half empty and smelled like wet coats and old coffee. Elias sat near the back, the locket closed in his fist, watching the city change through the window. Cracked sidewalks giving way to swept ones, chain link giving way to iron, corner stores giving way to nothing at all, just walls and gates and long driveways that didn't show the houses behind them. He got off 2 stops early because he wasn't sure the driver would actually stop closer to where he needed to be, and he didn't want to ask and be told no. He walked the rest, maybe 20 minutes, his shoes soaked through by the time the houses stopped being houses and started being estates. Halfway there, a car slowed beside him, not stopping, just slowing enough for the driver to get a good look, the way people did when they wanted to be sure he wasn't about to become their problem. He kept his eyes forward and kept walking. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. He'd stopped letting it change his pace a long time ago, mostly because reacting to it never once made it stop. He found the address. A wall of iron bars taller than he was. A guard booth off to the side. A man in uniform already stepping out before Elias had fully reached the gate. "Help you? I found something. I think it belongs to whoever lives here." The guard's eyes moved over him once, slow, head to shoes, wet jacket, no bag, just a backpack with a broken zipper. Hands shaking slightly, though Elias tried to keep them still. "Sure you did. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to give it back." "Yeah, that's what they all say." The guard didn't move from the gate, arms crossed now. "We get 2 or 3 of you a month. Different story every time. Same ending. Walk away, or I call it in as a trespass. I'm not asking to come in. I'm not asking for anything. I just need 30 seconds. You don't get 30 seconds. You get told to leave, and if you're smart, you leave." Elias felt the heat rise in his face. He'd been talked to like this before, like a threat, like a con, and every time it landed somewhere it shouldn't. He took 1 step back, thought about the bus fare. He didn't have to get home if this went nowhere. Thought about just dropping the locket on the sidewalk and forgetting the address, forgetting all of it, letting it be someone else's problem. He almost turned. Then he opened his hand and looked at the locket again. Whoever lost this had engraved an address into it, like it mattered enough to be found by exactly the kind of stranger standing here right now. That wasn't nothing. "I understand if you don't believe me," Elias said, quieter now, some of the heat draining out of his voice on purpose. "You don't have to let me in. Can you just take it to the door yourself? I'll wait right here. I'm not going anywhere." The guard studied him another second, something in his face shifting slightly. Not trust, just a small crack in certainty from a minute ago. "Stay there. Don't move from this spot." He disappeared through a side door set into the wall. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The rain picked up. Elias stood with his hands in his pockets, water running off his hood, wondering if the guard had simply tossed a locket in a drawer somewhere and gone back to whatever he'd been doing before Elias showed up. The side door opened again. Not the guard this time. A woman in a staff uniform, holding the locket out in front of her, like it might do something unexpected. "Where did you find this?" "On Ferrer Street, in a gutter under a grate, this morning." She turned it over once, the same way the pawnbroker had, except her face didn't stay bored the way his had. It went somewhere else entirely, something between disbelief and alarm. "Wait here," she said. "Don't move." And this time she didn't walk back through the door. She ran. The main door opened before Elias had time to wonder if he should knock, or whether he even still could. A man stood in the doorway, tall, composed in a way that felt built rather than natural, dressed like someone who'd never had to think about what he was wearing. But his hands weren't composed. They were gripping the locket the staff member had just handed him, knuckles gone pale. A man stood in the doorway, tall, composed in a way that felt built rather than natural, dressed like someone who'd never had to think about what he was wearing. But his hands weren't composed. They were gripping the locket the staff member had just handed him, knuckles gone pale. "Get him out of my house." The guard from the gate stepped forward again, hand already reaching for Elias's arm. "Sir, $20 wasn't worth this." Elias said before he could stop himself. Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. His eyes stayed fixed on the locket in his own hand, like he was checking it was real and not some trick of the light. Where did you get this? Ferrer Street, under a storm grate. I could have pawned it for $20 this morning. I didn't. People don't return things, Marcus said, voice flat, control in a way that felt rehearsed from use. They come back for a reward or a story to sell or something. That's how this always goes. Every single time. I'm not here for a reward. That's what they all say too. Marcus finally looked up from the locket and at Elias directly, really looked the way people rarely bothered anymore. I've been burned by people I trusted with far less than this sitting in front of them. So forgive me if I don't take a stranger's word for anything right now. He opened the locket, went silent, his jaw tightened. And for several long seconds, he didn't say anything at all, just stared down at whatever was inside. Then, without looking away from it, he raised a hand toward the guard. Stand down. All of you back inside. The guard hesitated, glanced at the staff member, then stepped back and disappeared through the side door. Marcus closed the lock in his fist and studied Elias again, slower this time, like he was reading him instead of just looking. The wet jacket, the shaking hands he was clearly trying to hide, the way he stood, tired, but not slouched, like exhaustion hadn't gotten all the way into him yet. You walked here. Bus, part of the way. Walked the rest. With what money? The last of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment, turning that over. You could have kept the 20 and never thought about this again. Nobody would have known the difference. I thought about it the whole way here. Elias said, I'm not going to stand here and pretend I didn't want to keep it. I did. Something shifted slightly in Marcus's expression. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the suspicion had a hairline crack in it now that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. How did you know to come to this address? It was engraved inside. I figured that meant somebody wanted it found, not just kept. Marcus turned it over once more in his hand, and Elias caught himself studying the hinge without quite meaning to, the way it sat slightly loose, worn from age, the pin inside almost certain original to whenever it was made. That hinge has been reset before, Elias said. Not recently. Whoever did the first time knew exactly what they were doing, but it's due for it again soon, another year or two at most. Marcus looked up sharply. You know Locket hinges? I used to know a lot of small mechanisms. Elias paused, choosing the next words carefully. It's been a while since any of that mattered to anyone. What did you do before? The question landed harder than it should have for something so ordinary. I was an engineer, Elias said. Precision instruments, calibration work mostly. Some of the older mechanical systems companies still keep running, because replacing them costs more than fixing them. Then I got sick. Cost me the savings first, then the job when I couldn't keep up the hours, then the apartment a few months after that. It happens faster than people think it will. Faster than I thought it would. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. He looked down at the locket again, opened it fully this time, and finally let Elias see what was inside. A small photograph, faded at the edges, a young woman smiling at whoever was holding the camera. My daughter gave me this the week before she died. Marcus said quietly, the practiced flatness gone from his voice entirely. I've had people searching for it for 3 years. Private investigators, reward, postings, all of it. I'd stopped believing it still existed. He turned it over once more, thumb resting on the worn hinge Elias had noticed. It went missing during the move, after I let someone I trusted handle the packing of her things, because I couldn't bring myself to do it. Half of it never made it to storage. I spent a year convinced he'd sold pieces of her off one at a time, and I'd never prove it. Never see any of it again. This is the first thing that's ever come back. That's the person you meant, Elias said. Earlier, about being burned by someone. Marcus nodded once, like he hadn't expected to be understood that quickly. It's why I assumed the worst of you at the door. I've learned not to separate the two anymore, the people who take, and the people who might not. Elias didn't say anything right away. There wasn't a version of I'm sorry that fit the size of what Marcus had just handed him, so he let the silence sit instead of filling it badly. You could have sold it for $20, Marcus said again, like he still couldn't quite make the math add up in his head. I know. If you've made it this far, you already know how rare this kind of choice actually is. Subscribe now, because what Marcus does next is a part of this story people don't forget. Marcus stood there for a while longer, still holding the locket, like he wasn't ready to close it yet. Come inside, just for a few minutes. You're soaked through and it's the least I can do. Elias hesitated right at the threshold, the same door that hadn't let him in 20 minutes earlier, before finally stepping through it. Inside, Marcus didn't offer money. He didn't offer a meal or a bed for the night, or any of the smaller, easier gestures that would have let him feel generous without really looking at the man in front of him. He just studied Elias for a second longer, the way you study something you're deciding whether to trust with more than you'd originally planned to. Precision instruments, Marcus said slowly. What kind, exactly? Calibration work, mostly. Some assembly on smaller mechanical systems. Gauges, timing components. I was good at it once. My company has an opening in our instruments division. Has for months. Actually, we can't find anyone under 50 who understands the older mechanical systems anymore. Everyone coming out of school now is trained on digital only, and half our equipment predates that entirely. Marcus turned the locket over once in his hand, almost absently. You said the hinge on this was reset by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. It was, we need someone who knows what they're doing. Elias didn't answer right away. It wasn't the kind of offer he'd let himself expect anymore, and it took him a moment to trust that he'd actually heard it correctly, that this wasn't about to turn into something smaller. I haven't worked in almost 2 years, he said finally. I don't know if I'm still good at any of it. And I don't know how to explain a 2-year gap to anyone who'd be signing off on hiring me. You won't have to explain it to anyone but me, Marcus said. And I already know how you spent this morning. Elias almost laughed, the first real crack in his own guard since he'd stepped through the door. Neither did I know if he'd bring this back, Marcus said. You did anyway. Elias looked down at his own hands, the same hands that had reached for $20 that morning, and then, for reasons he still couldn't fully explain, pulled back. Okay, he said quietly. Yes. Weeks later, Elias stood at a small metal locker in the instruments division, clocking out at the end of a shift that had run long because he'd wanted to finish calibrating a piece of equipment nobody else on the floor knew how to touch. He opened the locker door to grab his jacket. Taped inside was a photograph. The same young woman from the Locket. The one Marcus had never fully explained further and Elias had never asked about again. Some things being better left with a person who owns them can decide whether to share them. Next to the photo hung a small locket on a new chain. Not silver. Not old. A simple, inexpensive replica Marcus had quietly made. Not because it carried any value on its own, but because the original had taught him something he didn't want to risk forgetting. He'd started slow. The first week fumbling through equipment he used to know without thinking, his hands relearning what 2 years of not touching a single gauge had let them forget. By the second month, a junior technician had started asking him questions instead of the other way around. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like something quieter than that. Like a door he'd assumed was permanently shut had simply been unlocked the whole time, waiting on him to try to handle again. Elias closed the locker, put on his jacket, and walked out of the building into a night he was no longer spending outside. If this story moved you, go watch The Widow They Tried to Evict next. It's one of the ones that started all of this.